So this lesson looks at adding and subtracting fractions. So what you need to do when you add or subtract fractions is you always have to make a common denominator. So what that means is you have to find a common multiple of the denominators before you can bring the fractions together by adding or find the difference between them. So always when you're adding or subtracting fractions, make sure that you find that common denominator. So that's really important. And then you should always reduce your final answers in the end, so you should always look to see are there common factors that you can divide both the numerator and denominator of the fraction by in order to reduce your answer to lowest terms. So let's look at some examples. So in the first one I have a half plus 2/5. So I need to make a common denominator. So what that means is I'm looking for a common multiple, and to make my life easy I want the lowest common multiple of the denominators. So the lowest common multiple of 2 and 5. So 2 and 5. So I know that would be 10. So my lowest common multiple or lowest common denominator is 10 in the first one. So then I need to think, what would I multiply 2 by to make 10, and what would I multiply 5 by to make 10? So 2 times 5 gives me 10. And I know whatever I do to the bottom of a fraction, or the denominator, I must also do to the numerator in order to keep the fractions equivalent. And so I must multiply the top of the 1/2 by 5 as well. And then in the other fraction, 2/5, I said 5 times 2 would give me 10. So then whatever I do to the bottom of a fraction, I must also do to the top so that I keep the fraction equivalent. So now my fractions have changed a little bit. They look different, but they're still the same. They're still equivalent to the original fractions. So 1/2 becomes 5 over 10 plus 2/5 becomes 2 times 2 is 4 over 5 times 2 is 10. Okay, so 5/2 is the same thing as 1/2, and 4/10 is the same thing as 2/5. But now I have a common denominator, so I can bring the fractions together. So all I do there is I add the numerators. So 5 times 4 is 9 over 10, and I just keep the denominator the same. So then I would look to see, can I reduce 9 over 10? No, because 9 and 10 don't have any common factors, so that's my final answer there in the lowest terms. Okay, same idea for 5/8 plus 3/4. So I'm looking at the denominators 8 and 4, and I want to figure out a common denominator. And again, I want the lowest common denominator because that will make my life easier in the end. I will have less reducing to do. So I know that I can actually turn a 4 into an 8 by multiplying by 2. So I'm only going to change the second fraction here. So I'm going to multiply this fraction by 2 on the top and the bottom. So the first fraction, 5 over 8, stays the same. I didn't change it. I didn't have to. Plus, the second fraction now becomes 3 times 2 is 6 over 4 times 2 is 8. And then I add together the numerators. So 5 plus 6 is 11 over 8. Okay, and again I look, can I reduce that by dividing out a common factor? No, 11 is a prime number. I don't have any common factors between 11 and 8, so it's fully reduced. Also at this point, you should leave your answers as improper fractions is fine. Don't change them to mixed numbers. And then the last example, I have 9/5 plus 1/3, so I'm looking for a common multiple and the lowest common denominator of 5 and 3. So I know that would be 15, so I multiply 5 by 3 and the 9 by 3, and I multiply this fraction top and bottom by 5. So I get 27 over 15 plus 5 over 15. So that gives me 32 over 15. And again, I can't reduce that. I don't have any common factors between 32 and 15, so that's my final answer. So subtraction is going to the same way. I still need to make a common denominator, and I want to find the lowest common denominator again. So here I have in the first example 3 and 9 are my denominators. I know that I can turn the 3 into a 9 by multiplying by 3. So I'm going to multiply this second fraction by 3 in the top and bottom. So I have 7 over 9, that one didn't change, minus 3 over 9. And again, just like addition with subtraction, I'm just finding the difference between the numerators. So 7 minus 3 is 4, so I have 4/9 left. Okay, in the second example, I have 15/2 minus 1/4. Again, I can turn the 2 into a 4 by multiplying by a 2, so I'm going to change the first fraction and keep the second fraction the same. So I have 30 over 4 minus 1/4. So when I do that, I have 30 minus 1 is 29 over 4, and I can't reduce that as well. There's no common factors between 29 and 4. And then 2/3 minus 1/2. I have to change both the denominators now, so my lowest common multiple there, my lowest common denominator is 6. So I can turn the 3 into a 6 by multiplying by 2. And then I can turn the 2 into a 6 by multiplying by 3. So I have 4 over 6 minus 3 over 6. So remember, when I multiply the numerator and denominator by the same number, I end up getting equivalent fractions, the same fraction that just looks different in the end. So now I have 4 over 6 minus 3 over 6, so I subtract the numerators, so 4 minus 3 is 1 over 6, and that is in its lowest form. Okay, thanks for watching.